All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Three on Tap, where the drinks are free, but the experience wasn't. It was Valentine's Day this weekend, so today we're going to be talking about love, nonprofit love, red flags, donor love languages, and the partnerships we probably should have defined 6 months ago. As always, I'm joined by Brian Partee of Nonprofit Marketplace and Spencer Chastain of Grace Consulting. But before we get to that, what are we drinking, boys?
Water. I'm the non-drinker. Water.
Get a day off today, and I am on the H2O train as well. So I got a good glass of Lake Chico water supply, tap water.
Well, you know what? I have a choice between a margarita and a Coors Light, and not to offend the Coors Light drinkers out there, but that's basically water. So I'm gonna have the Coors Light.
You know what I'm thinking, Greg? I will send you some money, and we'll come up with a good headset or something for Spencer on us as a early Christmas gift.
It'll be a Valentine's Day gift. We'll get him a heart.
Valentine's Day gift. Hearts. There you go with the earphones or hearts. I like that. I think we can find that.
Katie bought me a really nice set of earbuds for Christmas, and that's what I'm trying to use, and it's still acting stupid. So who knows?
So let's dig into today's topic, nonprofit love stories. So in the spirit of Valentine's Day, I thought it would be fun for us to focus on a few different topics as it relates to our love affair with nonprofit work. And so, you know how in some relationships, there's that moment early on where you feel like something feels off. It's not dramatic, it's not explosive, it's just that little voice in your head that's saying, hey, break this glass in case of emergency. But you ignore it because the chemistry is good and the energy is exciting and everybody's smiling. In nonprofit leadership, we do the same thing. The board says, we trust you completely, but asks for weekly updates on things that really don't matter. The CEO says, we're like family here, but there's no accountability structure. A funder might say, we love what you do, but then quietly reshapes your mission with every additional ask that they make and attached to a grant. And we tell ourselves that it's fine because we need the relationship, because we believe in the mission, and because we don't want to be difficult in personal relationships. But red flags cost you time in personal relationships. In nonprofit leadership, red flags cost you momentum, culture, and sometimes your whole organization. There's a difference between healthy tension and structural misalignment. And most of us don't even leave because it's toxic. We leave because it's slowly eroding the trust around us. So today, for our first pour, we're asking, what are the red flags in nonprofit leadership that we ignored too long? And how do you know when it's worth fighting for and when it's time to call it quits?
I'll give it to Spencer because I always start. I want to be a fair and equal.
Look at you. You're growing as a person, Brian.
I should have known day one. I was in an interview for a CEO role, and the interview turned into more of a shoot the breeze with friends situation, and had nothing to do with the job. And I actually left that interview and said no, and then gave him another chance after some some apologetic phone calls from a board chair who didn't even show up to that initial interview. So that yeah, that should have been it right there. And I love the work, and kind of fell into it at that point. Um, there were lots of other red flags along the way, and ignored way too many of them. But the board chair not showing up for the initial interview should have been number one, and enough to make me look elsewhere.
So, Spencer, if you could take a message in a bottle and communicate with your, you know, previous self walking into that initial interview, what would you tell yourself?
Yeah, I think in that was my first CEO role, and so I was pretty green, but I knew that wasn't the right situation. Um, uh, it's really as cliche as it is, just trust your gut. If something feels wrong on day one, it's only going to get worse on day 100.
Not to tie this back to like a relationship, but when it really is in a lot of ways, right? And listening to you talk, Spencer, I'm thinking about relationships that that are iconic that we always think back to. Oh, I can change her or I can change him, right? and, and at the end of the day, these folks, like, they've established the culture of the organization, and there is no changing them. I mean, there is slow, gradual institutional change over time, but for the immediate future, what you see is what you get. And so when people tell you who they are, believe them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
I guess my story was kind of similar. I my red flag was in the first interview for a CEO position that I had. And I remember walking into that interview. This was right in the time of COVID, so everything was new in Zoom, and so we were just getting used to that. But I remember looking around at the interview panel and seeing 5 white dudes who were all over 60, and I thought to myself, "Boy, this doesn't feel very forward leaning." And, it just felt like a very good old boys kind of approach to running a nonprofit. And so, at some point, I actually talked to the recruiter and I said, "Hey, this is a problem for me. I'm used to working with a really diverse board, a really diverse group of opinion, thought, and experience. And I think everyone has the ability to contribute in that way. And on further reflection, I'm looking at this group, this body, and, there's just a couple women as a part of this board of, 20 people. And everyone on the board is white." And so, is this reflective of the kind of agency that I want to lead and our values and alignment? I ended up falling into the trap and thinking, oh, I can fix them, right? I can change them. And ultimately, I think that came back to, yeah, it was a great bit of foreshadowing for what my relationship with that organization was going to be.
I'll give you a good one. And that's like I said, it might this might be something that hits you, Greg, but I don't want to
There
belabor
he is drawing the line
the
again. Jeez.
hillbilliness of what the rural clubs that Spencer and I have experienced. But uh I was offered a possum chew. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just serious. No possum chew. The thing that got me though is when they said when this was after I was hired. I had a board member come up and go, "Well, that's not the way we've always done it." Oh, when people just said that's not the way we've always done it. Well, you know what? Your organization is 80 kids, about 100 kids total enrolled, 80 kids a day, 100 kids enrolled, and that's it. And that's not success. That's not where you want that. Yeah, I can tell that you've always done it that way because that's why, it's nothing has changed. I mean, when I got in, I finally got a president. I mean, you've heard me mention a couple of names that I've had presidents for. I had two Steves. This was my first Steve. And first Steve was like, board, Brian knows what he's doing. We need to get out of his way and help him do what he's supposed to do and not dictate what he's supposed to do because that's the way we've always done it. And we ended up, and I've told you my numbers without not trying to be braggadocious or anything like that, but we went from 80 kids a day to like 1,500 kids a day. Our budget went from $225,000 to $2.5 million kind of thing. So it was like, but we've always done it that way. Well, yeah, and that's why you're the way you are. And I mean, and I'm not saying that trying to be a jerk, but that's a love story kind of thing when you go, uh-oh, your word, I think, Greg, I mean, word anybody uses red flags. That's definitely a red flag when, and side note, we can even take a bonus red flag when you have a board member telling you how you're supposed to do it when you didn't ask for help. I don't mind. I never mind people talking to me, but that's like, that's getting into the controlling board to where it gets, stupid for you because they might not know how to do things as well as we knew as CEOs, but they think they do. Oh, anybody can run a boys and girls. Anybody can run a nonprofit. It's so easy, and it's not. So what they're doing practically doesn't work. So the fact that could be a bonus red flag that they're, you know, here's how we do it. Well, that's not how I'm going to do it. So anyway, that was mine.
Looking back at that, Brian, do you feel like that the red flag was more about behavior, or was it a misalignment on expectations, authorities, or incentives?
With me, it's always about behavior. No, I think that goes actually to more of a board member not knowing their role. Because if you, I mean, similar to what you said, Greg, is we had you know, on our board, our board was 100% white male. We had one woman, and that's it. And the crazy thing about it is, where I lived in Marshall, the average on average, the the average city has a high numbers around 8% of the population is black. In Marshall, it was like 41%. It was a crazy high, and we didn't have any black folks on our board. We didn't have any women on our board. So to me, I think the problem was that A, there was no diversity. B, they didn't do any orientation. They're like, hey, Greg, what are you doing next Thursday? Want to be on the board of the Boys and Girls Club? Yeah, come on. That's kind of what it was. And that, I think that's a problem. And then I started putting in, we had a very strict, by the time I left, even way before time I left, we had a really strict uh, uh, policies on how we took board members in, how we interviewed them. Two people had to vouch for them. I told them what was expected of them. So some people can't go, I didn't realize we had to go to meetings. Yeah, you did, because I told you about it. That we made sure they knew. And if you can't do it, great. So yeah, so that's the whole everything of what I think it was. I think it was a board who started a Boys and Girls Club because they wanted to feel good about themselves and not necessarily make an impact, a big impact, because that's a lot of work. And we don't want to, that's what I think it came down to.
In some ways, that sounds like it's a bit of both, right?
Yep.
Because the personality is defined by a lack of structure. And as a result, any introduction of structure or systems can be perceived very easily as a threat.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what I ran into too. Is well, that's not how we've always done it. Well, that's how we're going to do it now, because this is how it works. And when you walk into a club with 80 kids, knowing that there's 1,000 in that community, yeah, we can do better. And Brian, I echo every bit of that. I don't know if it's just the same rural dynamics or what, but that was very much folks have been on the board since day one, 20 years ago, when I walked in and said, there's a reason y'all are struggling. Uh, we got to do some things different, and that was not always well received by those that had been there for.
I think it's comfort. They're comfortable. They they're at the level they want to be at. Like in my case that I was talking about just a little while ago, 80 kids a day, that's great. Even though our school system has a population of 4,000, that's percentage wise, that's really, really, really bad. But we're helping 80 kids. Those are 80 kids who need us. Safe place after school. Dig it. That's right. That's good. But the mission of the Boys and Girls Club is to reach out to everybody. And much like you said, Spencer, that's how we started. The reason why I grew is because we had all these little small pocket towns, and I started going to each town, partnering with the school and doing school-based sites. Because why wouldn't Jefferson, Texas kids need a Boys and Girls Club? Why wouldn't Hughes Springs, Texas need a Boys and Girls Club? Why wouldn't Gladewater, Texas need a Boys and Girls Club? And the board was like, well, can we, I get it. That's where, as a board member, by the way, their job is fiscal responsibility. If I was just doing this and I don't know how we're going to pay for it, we're just going, then they should jump me and they should say that's a problem. But they were happy and they were comfortable with doing 80 kids. If they had their way, they would have stayed at 80 kids, kind of thing, and felt good about themselves that, hey, I'm doing something good. Well, now we need you to do something good. It's going to require a little bit more work, whether it's helping at the golf tournament or whether it's showing up to meetings or whether it's getting donations or whatever. They didn't want, I don't think this was more of a I don't want to say passion project, but it was an easy lift to tell people, well, I'm on the board of Boys and Girls Club. Of course I'm doing good things. So I'm on the board of Boys and Girls Club. You know what I mean? Not really being a working board.
So let's change the course of this conversation just a little bit, because I think, looking at the last handful of episodes, we've been very board focused. And a lot of the people who listen to this podcast may or may not be in a CEO role, right? And so, if we were to reframe this away from executive leaderships looking at new organizations to middle managers or leaders who are hiring new potential team members, what are the red flags that kind of crop up in that way?
Um, I had a person. Now we did a takeover. We did a merger. It was a different kind of merger because our town had 25,000 people, and the Boys and Girls Club we took over was from a city of 80,000. You don't often get 25,000 taken over 80. It's usually the other way around. And I had a person who was very well known in the community. Um, and in fact, her nephew is a soon to be Hall of Famer football player, well known family. Um, and we were talking about what I wanted to do, and she kind of gave me a similar thing as that's the way we've always done it. And it was a hard for me. I could have, I gave her way more chances than I should have because I would say I was partially afraid of her influence in her community. And oh my gosh, nobody's gonna come to Boys and Girls Club because I got rid of this beloved woman whose nephew is the pride and joy of our town and on TV every week, all that kind of stuff. And in turn, it cost me because I had this really great person who was my DO. She thought she should be CEO, and she was not equipped for that at all. But I had a new DO who was gonna awesome, and my DO, the existing lady gave her a bunch of grief, and my DO ended up quitting. And so I did get the bad reputation for a short period of time when I fired the lady I inherited, but I also lost a great employee. And I should have said, I should have known. Everybody said that she's not going to go for this. She's gonna cause bumps. And I was like, and I was being all cocky. I know I'm good with people. I like talking with people. I'm very patient, stuff like that. So I was like, oh no, she'll come around. We'll do it. We'll get this going. This is for the kids. And it didn't. And she told me, she goes, I'm gonna do it the way we've been doing it. And I was like, well, we got to change a few things. No, no, I'm gonna do it the way we get. And I was like, okay, you're silly. And I was just kind of playing it all off. And she told me what she was gonna do. And I didn't believe it. I was too cocky and believed in myself that, just, hey, talking and everybody, we're all part of the team and all that. Did that make a difference to her? And she was like, screw you. I wanted to be CEO and you got it. And so she intentionally, it could have been really a great sitcom. I mean, intentionally all the sneaky stuff she does in the background and stuff, I mean, she changed the printer. We had a printer right outside my office up in that area. And she made it so the printing went to her printer, which is in the back. I don't know what happened, and stuff like that. So, yeah, that was mine. That's mine. It wasn't quite as funny as living through it, though.
Boy, that's got to be really frustrating. I had a similar situation. I remember walking in to a new role and inheriting a staff member, and it was very clear early on that this staff member felt that they should have gotten the position that I got. And, I tried to be kind, I tried to be generous. I mean, my leadership style is very uh, communal. I like getting a lot of opinions before I make a decision. And then when I've made a decision, that's the course that, I expect that we're going to be headed down. And in this case, often the person would counteract my decisions or work against them in the background. And it just created such a toxic atmosphere that it was really difficult for us to feel good about the work that we were doing. And, I mean, at the same time, you try and kindness is a huge part of this work, right? Creating an environment that's reflective of the work that you're doing is key, right? Like, I don't care who you are, whether or not you're a stakeholder, a staff member, a board member, or a donor, when you walk in and out the doors of a nonprofit, you should walk away changed better because of that experience. And unfortunately, when you created the Unfortunately, that kind of approach requires a lot of trust that we're all here for the right reasons, that we're all going to have each other's back and we're all pulling in the right direction together. And unfortunately, when you're out of alignment with regard to direction and it becomes about ego and toxicity, it just derails everything and makes everything so much harder.
I do a whole thing on I've been doing it for about 6 months on culture change, and I utilize Ted Lasso as my angle. And something that I put in there, which is what you said, it was something that Roy Kent, if I okay now, I'm assuming you guys have you seen the show? Are you familiar with Ted Lasso? Okay, Roy Kent is a grizzly old veteran who growls at everything, like literally he growls. Um, when he's mad at something, like if you did something he didn't like, he'd go like, "Argh," and show his teeth and stuff like that. No secret where he stands, but he's also when he screws up, he's the first to admit it. And he always said there's a difference between being nice and being kind. And you, like you said, Greg, you and I both were trying to be, were we being nice or being kind? Because nice is subjective, maybe, and being kind is actually an action. So, but it's telling them, hey, you wrote this report, and that's really great, but it wasn't really that good. So you got to improve your standard. You know what I mean? And that's what I started to, I started thinking about that. I was being nice to her and I wasn't being kind and saying, hey, you're very valuable to this team and you can make a difference in all these kids' lives. However, if you're not part of the team, you probably need to go and find something that'll work better for you, and I didn't do that and everything imploded.
Yeah, and that's something that that's always resonated with me as a leader and a supervisor as well, right? Like I don't correct because I'm cruel. I correct because I care, right? I want you to be your best professional. I want you to excel and feel proud of the work that you're doing. And part of that means that we're going to have conversations from time to time on where you can improve. I think what also makes it more difficult is that often the people who are attracted to nonprofit work carry with them a lot of baggage. There are a lot of broken people who work in nonprofits, and you want to create opportunities for them to engage because a lot of the time their stories are core to your mission. But, at the end of the day, broken people are jagged and those sharp edges can really inflict damage on those who are working around them in the systems that we all rely on.
Just follow all that mess, Spencer, with between what Greg and I were saying.
Man, yeah, y'all set the bar fairly high. No, I think especially in rural small communities, uh, hiring at the especially the middle manager level is really hard. Uh, the talent pool is
That's what I say. Tell them why, because you get what you get.
you get what you get, and so we had an opening for a like a unit director role shortly after I got there, and that's a whole other story. But we it took us a while to fill that, and ended up hiring somebody from uh, outside of the community because I interviewed a bunch of people from the community and just it wasn't there. The person we ended up hiring had the resume, had the education, had the experience. Everything looked great. Uh, she got there and was, how do I say this nicely? Um, More concerned about her resume and her appearance than she was about really doing the work that needed to be done. So it was more um, self gratifying and the spotlight on her than on making sure that the kids were getting quality programming. It looked good on paper, it looked good on social media, but the we fielded so many complaints from parents and from others that just were that she cared more about finding a boyfriend uh, while she was at the club than she did making sure that kids. No, 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 no. Uh, but among their parents and people in the community, uh, that that was her main concern, and she we just weren't up to her standard culturally. Um, being from a bigger city than we were in, and um, it was not a good fit, and I allowed it to go a lot longer probably than I should have, mostly because I knew that we weren't going to find anybody else in the local talent pool. And when she did leave, um, it was a revolving door after that, trying to find somebody, and they're still in that same situation. They can't keep anybody in that role, and that's an issue with not paying well and a few other governance problems there. But we couldn't, and like I said, I let that go on too long for the sake of not having to go through that search process again. When really I should have just bit the bullet and done that a whole lot earlier.
Okay, so we've talked about red flags. Now let's talk about relationships we actually want to work. Because if nonprofit leadership is built on anything, it's trust. And most of that trust runs through donors. And here's an uncomfortable question. More and more, I'm watching throughout the nonprofit ecosystem people going to systems and tools that are all about broad spectrum generalization and appeals. We're losing a lot of the individual touch points to build that actually build relationships with people. And so, what if the fundraising struggles that we're seeing in the sector are not financial, but relational? I'll give you an example. We send the same appeal to everyone. We measure success in clicks and open rates, and we thank people with templates. And then we're surprised when loyalty feels thin. But donors, like everyone else, connect on an individual scale. Some want recognition, and some want proximity, and some want data, and some want stories, and some just want to know that you're steady and competent. I think the mistake that most of us are making today is that when we treat all donors the same, what we're basically doing is going on the same first date over and over and over again, and reading from the same script and hoping that this time it'll land. The best development work isn't loud or desperate or seasonal. It is attentive. It asks what makes the person feel connected, what builds trust for them on an individual basis, and what makes them lean in instead of tune out. So for our second pour, we're asking, are we actually fluent in the love languages of our donors, or are we just broadcasting and hoping that someone feels seen? Brian, you had some really interesting thoughts on this one. Take us away.
I think one of the things that I like letting them know as a donor of what we're doing without saying you have to. I mean, the phrase that we've always used on this show, or I've always used on this show, is, I come to them every year in April because that's our golf tournament. And you're like, you're our ATM. And I like to try to let them know. In fact, we had a policy, the board helped me develop it. We had a policy where we would try to talk to our donors somewhere or another 7 times a year, whether it's in person, whether it's going out for coffee, whether it's sending them a postcard. And our postcards, by the way, a lot of them didn't have any of donate now. Just here's what we're doing. Thank you for being part of our thing. So I think my language, I like to let them know, and this is that they're important. Yes, we appreciate you're giving money, and here's how you are part of our solution, how you're contributing to us doing whatever we do. That to me was always a big deal, because we've all heard this before. That's easier for any business, nonprofit or not, to keep an employee than rather than to get a new one. Keep a customer rather than get a new one. So that's where I come from. I think telling them how great they are and how we're, Shark Tank, dude. They're investors in your organization. And here's what we did with your money. We made sure that we fed this many more kids, or we made sure this many more dogs didn't get put to sleep at the animal shelter or whatever. That's what they want to hear, because they want to know tangible stuff, that how their money is helping us make the world a better place.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with that more. There's a great book, and I'm forgetting the name of it and who it's written by, of course. But it's all about how donors don't want static responses. They don't want to feel like they're just being propositioned in a general way, or to walk away feeling like they're just an ATM for your organization. And, I couldn't agree with that more. When you're looking at the most impactful donors, it's often because something that you're doing is resonating with them. And if you're not taking the time to understand the why, then you're just hoping, you're just, pretending that you're going to be able to rely on them on a go forward. And so, I think it's important to recognize and take time to spend with large donors, um, and understand where they're coming from in order to better position and steward them for greater investment in the future. And sometimes that means stewarding them through coffee and, tours. And sometimes that also means paying attention to their circumstances. One of the best tools that I've seen is, I'll read an article and think, oh, I think this person might really enjoy this. Or I'll keep notes about, oh, I know that Tommy's son broke his ankle playing soccer 8 months ago. I'll just call and see how his son is doing. And, I think it's intimidating, especially with, our culture's transition away from things like phone calls and in person meetings to everything digital and text based. But taking the time to actually make that effort can be a huge part of building your donor base and getting them to support you in very deep ways.
Well, I think what it comes back to is, like I said, the whole concept of making the donor feel like they're part of your solution, like they're making a difference through you. They might not have the capacity to work with kids because, oh, kids drive me crazy, but they want to do what they can to help. And if it happens to be money, it's money. That's how they do it. So the way I see it is, um, when you do, it's funny, we're talking about Valentine's Day and love and all that kind of stuff, but when you do these things, a good donor relationship is, I kills me when people call up for me to, hey, I need money quick and grants and all this stuff. And that's not the way it works. It's, you're talking to these people for, months and months and years, and bringing them in a little bit. And here's what we're doing, and here's how we're changing, and here's how you're part of that change. And that's the big thing that and like I just said earlier, it was, the donors are not ATM machines. They're investors. They're a place where we all get money, but it's how you treat them. So to me, like I said, I was always big on my key thing when we talk about a love language was stewardship. And it was going to them and letting them know what we're, hey, by the way, we're doing this next Thursday. We have a little soccer championship. No money, no nothing. Just come in. Oh, you've been such a great person helping us, develop kids at the Boys and Girls Club. We'd love to have you come out and just watch the game. Whatever, things like that. Make them feel important and bring them into your family rather than say, I only need you when I need money. So that's my angle.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, uh, understanding that your donor's love language may not be the same as yours, and crafting that communication, that stewardship in a way that really connects with them more so than what you are necessarily comfortable with. I am by nature, I'm a very introverted person, so it can be difficult, um, for me to make that phone call, that face to face meeting sometimes. But understanding that, for certain donors, that is what's most meaningful to them, and getting out of our comfort zone, getting out of what we are, our own preferences, to make sure that we're meeting them where they want to be met. Some of them, it's as simple as sending that postcard or that impact report, especially some of your like foundation folks. A lot of times that's they're content with that, but others need a little bit more attention, and just kind of understanding your own limitations and your own preferences, and being able to be self-aware of those in that stewardship process, and knowing that sometimes you got to do the things that you don't want to do because those are the people that are equipping you to do the work.
Okay. Well, that takes care of our second pour. Let's move on to the third. So, that relationship where nobody feels quite defined, that relationship where nobody quite defines what it is, but everyone knows it's not quite working. You're not officially together, but you're not free either. You keep showing up because it feels safer than starting over. In nonprofit leadership, we have those two. We call them strategic partnership, we call them collaborations, and we call them alignment. But sometimes they're just situationships. A grant maker who slowly reshapes your priorities until you barely recognize your own mission, a municipal partner that drains staff capacity but feels politically impossible to step away from, a sponsor that wants visibility without depth, a merger conversation that never fully commits but never fully ends. And we stay because the funding matters, because the optics matter, and because walking away feels risky. But there is a difference between interdependence and codependence and dependency. How do you know when a partnership is strategic and beneficial and when it's just something you're afraid to define or step away from? And more importantly, how do you reset it without burning the bridge?
Ooh, that's going to take some thought. I think, Greg, in your lead up to that, you answered a lot of the question, uh, which is great. And I think when we can talk more about that, especially when we talk about mission drift, right? Uh, when donors or grantors or whoever get way too into, well, you have to be able to do this, 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 and this, or we want our names here, 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 and here. Is it about, this sounds weird, but is it about you or is it about the mission? And if the mission has to change for them to participate, I think that gets to be a major issue. Or like we had one of the organizations I was with, we had a local business person who would finagle some of their national partnerships to funnel some money to us. Not a huge amount, $1,000 or so a year. Nothing that ever came out of this business's pocket, but then would hold that over individual employees' heads when we didn't use their business with our personal lives. Uh, and to me, like that's a major issue, just because I don't control where my people spend their money. It's theirs, and it that should have no effect on a donor relationship. If a middle manager goes and buys something from somebody else's business instead of yours, why does that affect the commitment to the club? So that was
I think they're missing the point, Spencer. That it's money not contingent. I'll give you $50 billion for the kids if you never eat at McDonald's again or whatever. It's not conditional. That's where the problem lies, is when people want things. I mean, I'm not when you're doing a sponsorship, I don't have a problem with them asking for stuff. Oh, I'd like my name on the banners on the gym and all that. If I give you $5,000, I'd like banners on the name of the gym. I'd like you to do uh 20 posts a year on your Facebook, social media. I dig that. That's a business transaction. But when you're a donor and you say, I'm going to give you 50 grand, about the only condition I ever have believed in that it's the donor's right is if it's something that they're into. They're like, hey, we had a guy who he and his wife they like to sing, and they sang in their church choir and all that kind of stuff. They said, we'll give you money. We'll give you the money to start a real choir, like a competitive choir that will teach kids how to sing, where they could get scholarships to college for singing, stuff like that. I don't have a problem with that, because did I have other needs at the time? Yes. Did I want to do a choir at that time? No. But he's like, we'll fully fund it. We'll make it good. You tell me what you need. That's a donation, as opposed to, hey, if McDonald's gives you $100, then you better eat at McDonald's every day for the next month. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean this specific individual uh, would approach him later on to help provide jerseys or something for a flag football team. and made the statement, when they start shopping at my business, then I'll support them. Uh, like uh, individuals. I mean, if the club did business with them, but his whole thing was when the individuals patronize his business, then he'll think about it. I was like, man, that's so wrong on so many levels.
But here's the way I agree with you. He's 100% wrong. But the way I look at it, Spencer, is then that's the dude you don't want. That's the relationship you don't want. Because what's going to be next? It's almost like, once you get once you succumb to a threat or a I'm going to tell your wife about this if you don't do this. Just go tell your wife it's whatever it was you did. You know what I mean? Because they're going to just
Right,
hold it over
right,
you forever. And I don't want to live under that pressure. So bye.
right. Well, and Brian, you know this as well as I do. In small towns, those people tend to control lots of different
Yep.
entities,
Yep.
and so it was. Not only were we feeling the heat there, it was coming through some other organizations that this person was involved in that were starting to he was starting to put his weight behind them not being as involved with the club, and it just absolute disaster of a situation.
Wow. I mean, I think at the same time, those kinds of relationships can be manipulated into a much more advantageous position too, right? Because if you're dealing with someone who's purely transactional, well then okay, if you want to do business with them, then figure out the transaction that makes sense and makes it a value add for them. And then, they have to respond on a qualitative grounds, right? Because it's no longer a question about whether or not these people patronize your organization or work for your business in order for you to get the support. It's because they're making an emotional decision, right? And if that's the case, that's fine. But justify it. And depending on the relationship and their local ties and what your organization wants to do, you always have the ability to coordinate a boycott. You don't think we're using your business? Okay, well, strap in because here are all of these parents who work are connected to. No one makes $1 million alone, and this is your opportunity to support and give back to the people who have helped you on your way. I don't know. I look at these things, these situationships. The first thing that kind of leapt to mind was OJJDP. So, for those of you listening in, OJJDP is a federal grant and it's ubiquitous with Boys and Girls Clubs. There are a ton of Boys and Girls Clubs that leverage that funding. And generally, the unanimous consensus is that it is a total pain in the ass. You have to go through a ton of different paperwork, a whole bunch of budgets and spreadsheets, none of which are really relevant to today's work. And so what we end up doing is really copying and pasting what we did last year and asking for more money. And so, every single time, right? And so I think that's a great example. And that money never comes, right? I mean, unless you're a major metro club, you get just peanuts for the work that you invest with all the tracking and backward. And that kind of just becomes, I mean, maybe that's something that you can speak to, Brian, with all the grant writing you've done. But I feel like there is a real imbalance with regard to how funders approach and nonprofits with RFPs and then expect them to devote a ton of resources in the application phase without any hope that they're actually going to secure funding. I mean, in many cases, I felt like I was submitting my social security card, my son's blood type. It was just all of these, case studies on top of all of these other, very personal things to the organization. And, you'd figure out, I mean, thank God for things like Instrumental, but you'd figure out halfway through doing all of this that your organization wasn't even qualified for the grant to begin with, which of course wasn't disclosed until halfway through the application process.
While Brian's thinking about that, to Greg's point on OJJDP funding, yeah, I mean we've seen over the last 5-6 years A pretty substantial number of clubs opt to not pursue that funding because of the burden that it puts on for honestly not a huge amount of money.
Well, it depends. So long as it was something for kids, quote unquote, air quotes for those who can't see. Um, I mean, it was a lot of money, and but the reporting changed. But that's because we're paying for the sins of other people because so many people take advantage of the system. It's two or three people who screw up in a big way and misuse the funds that make it hard for all of us, kind of thing. So that's also part of it. But we used to get a ton of it, but you are right. It's for those who don't know, where I think where Spencer was going with the grants is or with the OJ, we just call it, that's how old I am. We just call it the OJP. It didn't develop with the two extra letters in there. Um, but with the OJP, it was one of those cases of how many 5-year-olds, how many male 5-year-olds, how many female 5-year-olds, how many male 5-year-olds white, male 5-year-olds black, male 5-year-olds Latino, male 5-year-olds, American, Native American, stuff like that. And it just became so hard. And we actually did it just again, both you guys know, I don't know, you guys might have done this. We didn't have at the time, they didn't have systems like, well, obviously not my club hub, but they didn't have ways to track. So we would sit in the room, we'd close down for 3 days at the club, and we go, Brian Partee, white male, 5 years old. And somebody who's doing white would check white, the race. Somebody who's doing age would do the age. Somebody who's doing gender would do gender. And at the end of the day, we totaled it, we'd squish it all together and we'd come up with our report and have good numbers for it because we didn't have a way to check it in there. But I mean, I think that goes back to what you were saying, Spencer, earlier, about staying with your focus on your mission. And if it's going to make a difference, and sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, OJP money helps a lot of people a lot of times, even though it's a pain in the butt to do it and to report it.
Okay, so let me give you another example of a situation that I'm navigating with a client. So this client runs an after school program that was being supported by a county office of education. County Office of Education is an LEA for a federal grant called that you transition to a state funding source called ESSER. The county applied for the funding using and citing a relationship with this organization, secured the funding, never told the organization that they got the funding. They used, because of other grant relationships, the attendance data from those grant relationships to continue to report on this funding as though there was an existing relationship for this additional pot of funding. It wasn't until June of the year that there was an audit that the county came forward to this organization and said, "Hey, we got $1 million in funding. We have been identifying you as a partner, and we have $100,000 left to spend. We'd like to just give it to you, so we can do this report." How do you, in that situation, respond? This is clearly an example of where an organization has taken advantage of you. It's there isn't a lot of definition with regard to where the benefits are. And how do you walk back that kind of relationship without burning the bridge?
Well, wouldn't you? I mean, maybe I didn't get the whole story, but I'd be like, burn the bridge.
Yeah.
I bye.
I mean, that's where I was, when I was talking to the client. The client's board says, I never like leaving money on the table. And they're looking at that $100,000 thinking we can use that. So again, here you are trying to run your nonprofit. And now you've got board members who are pressuring you to take this funding. What is clearly an ethical default by this LEA to support your organization. and you're in a position where, you feel like you have to lead with your values, what do you do?
Be ready. You got to be. I think you have to. You say bye. You got to be ready to suffer the consequences because you live on your principles, and that one of those consequences might be, adios to you too, as you didn't take this money and you wrecked a relationship, even though you're doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah, not all money is good money, though. And if they're going to treat you like that now, they're going to, like we said earlier, they showed you who they are. Trust them, because it's going to happen again. And that's not an audit trail I want to be a part of, to be perfectly honest, because I would bet that there was a lot more in that budget than 100,000 for that situation. Yeah, organizations I worked for received a lot of ESSER funding, not to that level, uh, but it was the reporting on it wasn't quite 21st century, but it was pretty considerable, and I don't want any part of, because that also would put them in single audit status. Uh, so again, I think as an organization, you got to think about: do you want to be pulled into that
Right.
disaster?
I'm with you. I'm with you. But yeah, when it comes down to doing what's right and what's best for your organization, I mean, you don't, and you can't, as much as we all in the nonprofit world, as much as we all want money, you really can't chase it if it's not, you know, if it's not within any, somebody comes to you and says, how would you like to build? I'll give you $1 million to build a water slide on top of your Boys and Girls Club. No, no liability, and no, but it's $1 million. I I don't care. It doesn't make sense. It's just it's out of line. It's not doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So
I mean, and that's I think where we get into trouble with the mental, emotional, and ethical gymnastics that professionals in this nonprofit space are often forced to jumble around, right?
yeah,
You're here because you want to make the world a better place, and to do that, you need money. At the same time, you have to be cognizant of the source of that funding and how that funding reflects on your agency and whether or not it's in line with your core values as an agency and what you're trying to achieve. I mean, I think that speaks to a different question as well. Like, at what point, you know, is it immoral to amass wealth to the point that it's grotesque? And if so, is allowing a donor to donate from that kind of circumstance, allowing them to obfuscate any moral responsibility? They make $1 billion and donate $1,000 to your organization. Are they really doing their part? And are you giving them, a moral blank check in a sense?
well, I was actually at a training uh in Atlanta with Boys and Girls Club, and one of the things that they were talking about is a side conversation broke out, and this was right when they were really getting into their girl empowerment stuff. And somebody was talking about how Hooters was trying to give them money, and of course Hooters, they don't care how good of a waitress you are, it's just how you're good you look, kind of thing, right? And would you take that money? And it was a heated argument because well, yeah, we're using it, we can do it. No, we're going to stand on our values and stuff. And somebody said it was a guy from North Carolina, religious dude, and he said that it's the devil's money put to the Lord's use. And so you can, if you can find a reason to use it or anything like that, and make something good out of it. Now we're not talking, blood money, drug money, anything like that, but we're talking, the cause and everything was super was super not what Boys and Girls Clubs at the time or any time were looking for. So
I mean, at the same time, Philip Morris was a national
exactly,
sponsor.
exactly. Cigarettes are a great example.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, it's all stuff you have to consider and put. What's the look? I mean, you take money from Hooters. How do you explain to the little 6-year-old girl, 10-year-old girl, whatever, that well, at Hooters it's all about looks, kind of thing. You know what I mean? It's kind of hard.
Okay, so for our last call, we're doing something different. in the spirit of Valentine's Day and modern leadership, we're each going to take 2 minutes and open ChatGPT and ask it to write a Valentine's Day card based on our own personal experience with nonprofit relationships, boards, donors, and partnerships. The good, the bad, and situationships. Then we're going to read them out loud and see what the algorithm thinks our love life looks like, our love language looks like as it relates to nonprofit. So, boys, I'm going to put this prompt into the chat so that you can copy it.
I already did mine. Oh yeah, I did. I don't do ChatGPT, so I just kind of did it in Gemini and stuff like that. So
Mine is rendering right now.
actually did one in Copilot, one in Gemini, because like I said, I'm not an AI person. First one, I got it's complicated, and it shows puzzle pieces and hand shaking and budget suggestions and board suggestions and stuff like that. My other one is this is my favorite one though. To the nonprofit sector, boards, donors, partners. You give me headaches, and I still love you. That's what I got.
Nice. All right, Spencer, is yours rendered?
Dear nonprofit sector, you exhaust me. Your boards drive me crazy. Your donors are demanding, but I just can't quit you. Happy Valentine's Day. And mine was GPT. Yeah.
I mean, dude, ours are eerily similar. And I don't know if that's just because the algorithm is being lazy.
Definitely a theme there.
You know what? I'm going to do something different. Give me just a second. I'm going to go on Google Flow because you did yours on Gemini and see what it comes up with. Okay, so here's two from Google Flow. So first on the left, to the nonprofit sector, our love is a tireless partnership of board meetings and donor pleas, yours in service and paperwork. And then on the right, happy B-Day, nonprofit sector. It's complicated, but I'm in. With love, a tired partner. So there you go. Those are our nonprofit Valentines for the year. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's our show for today. Let's wrap by saying to boards who keep us honest and donors who keep us funded and partners who keep us occasionally confused, happy Valentine's Day. May your red flags be addressed early, your donor love language be fluent, and your partnerships be clearly defined. Thanks for listening to 3 on Tap. If you enjoyed the conversation, share it with a nonprofit leader who's navigating their own complicated love story with the sector. Leave us a review, send us your stories, or better yet, write your own nonprofit Valentine and tag us. Until next time, keep leading with clarity and keep building with courage. Cheers, everyone.